Welcome, welcome. We are back for another live episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. Pretty excited today. Well, literally I'm excited every week for this show, but I'm really excited today as well. We're going to be talking about cloud security. I have my good friend and colleague, Ricardo Green. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for the invite. Looking forward to talking to your crew.
And listen, you guys are in for a treat because Ricardo brings his radio voice with him. Very smooth radio voice. So we should have some fun listening to that. So as we always do with the Tech Behind FinTech, we jump into our guest bio. I always like to read the bios of my guests. They do some pretty amazing things, and it's always good to celebrate that. So on that note, Ricardo Green is a cloud technology evangelist and senior solutions architect with Fugue. Prior to joining Fugue, he worked in the cloud business unit of a major telecommunications company, serving as a managed hosting and cloud computing specialist. He later served as a solutions architect, supporting the company's managed services offering on the Amazon Web Services platform. Ricardo has been in the cloud and managed hosting space for over 10 years, with the last 6 years focused on cloud architecture, security, and DevOps. Ricardo has multiple AWS certification and brings his passion for cloud technology to Fugue, where he supports efforts in increasing the adoption of Fugue in enterprise organizations. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you very much. It's always interesting to hear the bio being read out. And the interesting part about that I don't talk about is once upon a time I was in sales and then just grew a passion for my hands on the keyboard and tinkering with stuff.
You know what? That's an amazing story because, we always get into the news first and then we go into our topic. But I don't think I've talked to someone on this show who made the transition from sales to, you're not just like, okay, I do technology. Like, you're deep cloud architecture. I mean, I worked with you. We've talked, we've done things. Yeah. You're like deep into it. So explain that transition. How did that happen?
Yeah, it was interesting. I like to ask questions. So the hows drove me to the keyboard, learning more about cloud technology, seeing my sales engineers and solutions architects do stuff or talk about it. And I just wanted to learn more and more. So that's really what drove me. I had a curiosity. I was a computer science minor for a while at college, and it just drove me to want to learn and do and program and code. And the thing about a cloud, as our CEO talked about it, is, once upon a time, it took, months to build out a global network. And I can literally, while we're talking, build out a network on AWS, Azure, GCP, start configuring things, deploy an app. So we're talking, something used to take months, I can literally do in a matter of hours. So that part's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I was there once upon a time in my career, and just provisioning software, the capital expense that you have to spend on the actual hardware. It wasn't about elasticity and scaling up. It's literally like we're paying all this money up front, and that's a huge capital, what they call a capex, expenditure. And just the cloud, AWS, and what they were able to do, and then the rest of their contemporaries, amazing stuff in terms of just moving things forward. And if you look at it from, it's a tech behind FinTech. If you look at it from that perspective, the amount of FinTechs that were spawned because of fast development, and they eventually became unicorns, and some not even unicorns, but they're able to provide a service for a relatively minimum price as what it would have you would have paid in the 90s or in the early 2000s. So totally agree with your CEO in that perspective.
Absolutely.
So on that note, listen to the audience. Let me know that you are tuned in with us. Drop a comment or two. Say happy Friday. Just want to see if you're listening. And we will now jump into our news portion of the day. So the first article that I came across that we found interesting, crypto price volatility. Oh my God. So it was I'm going to read something, I think, from Bloomberg. The sour stretch for digital tokens started with Tesla's Inc. billionaire founder Elon Musk suspending the acceptance of Bitcoin payments and trading for the car. Also, China's central bank added a down. We're going to get into that. They basically are banning crypto from their institutions, so you can still own it. We're going to get into that. And also, the U.S. may require crypto transactions of 10,000 or more to be reported to the tax authority. Well, that 10,000 number, it's why people put like 9,900.
Right.
I mean, that's definitely a thing. So I mean, interesting. Like, I want to jump into of that list. China has banned financial institutions and payment companies from providing services related to cryptocurrency transaction and warned investors against the speculative crypto trading. Under the ban, such institutions, including banks and online payment channels, must not offer clients any service involving crypto, such as registration, trading, clearing, and settlement, 3 industry bodies said in a joint statement on Tuesday. What are your thoughts on that?
So, a couple of thoughts actually. So I don't know a ton about it, but it comes down to control. I often, when you think about crypto and mining and all the things, it's like, you're putting so much in the hands of the developer, and it's a security thing. That's one of the things we talk about just in the cloud space. If somebody gets into your account and starts mining Bitcoin because they're able to spin up all these compute instances and do all these different things. So, I mean, I think it really comes down to a level of control. It's you have something that is of created value, and now it's skyrocketing, going up and going down. So it's pretty volatile. But at the same time, it's like, it's pretty stinking impressive that this is all being created outside of what we view as like the traditional banks, the traditional folks that create all of our financial regulations and so forth. Like, it's a scary thing for them, because it's an area, it's like, we have no control over this. We can't see it. We can't monitor it. We can't dictate our rules on it.
You know what? And that's the real interesting part. I saw someone made a comment on social media, and they said something like, banks are is the blockbuster, and the crypto basically is like Netflix.
Yeah.
And it's like, you have to kind of change your policies. There's an article on that. Before we jump into that, let's acknowledge Jeff Martin. Happy Friday to you, Jeff, my guy. Every Friday he's here. We appreciate you for tuning in. To your point, I think it's definitely scary for the banks, especially for when you look at like nation states in terms of their currency, right? It's like, why do I have to depend on your currency right now if I can use Bitcoin from a state? I mean, in Venezuela, you see what happened with that. You need like a huge bag of money for a loaf of bread, right? So they switched over to Bitcoin. But it's protected. We had a guest a couple of months ago from Nigeria, and their central bank did the same thing that China just put in place, and then a lot of startups were scrambling to support it. So it's interesting what's taking place. I mean, I think after that huge dip, it went up again, I think 30% in terms of Bitcoin. But very, very interesting stuff. Let's jump into the next news article. So, bank tech efficiencies will be at a record levels because of competition with fintech. So, another article out of Bloomberg, U.S. banks could cut as many as 200,000 jobs in the next decade as they try to boost efficiency to compete with fintech and other upstarts encroaching on their territory, according to Wells Fargo. The eliminations are likely to accelerate as the economy reopens following the COVID-19 pandemic and conditions normalize. Wells Fargo analyst led by Mike Mayo said in a note, adding that this will be the biggest reduction in U.S. bank headcount in history. Banks have little choice but to improve productivity in the face of stiffening competition from fintech, technology, and retail firms. So that's why I wanted to, it was a good segue to what you mentioned. Another part of it, non-banks offering lower cost products online have steadily chipped away at businesses of traditional lenders, with efforts intensifying over the past year as the pandemic pushed consumers to digital options. Earlier this year, Walmart Inc. lured a pair of senior Goldman Sachs Group bankers to run its new fintech startup, a move that struck fear on Wall Street. So, totally in line with what you just said. That's why I wanted to hold it off as a perfect segue.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
So the first thing I'll say is I think any job reduction of any sort obviously is bad. It's not good for those that are in a position to lose their jobs.
Of course.
I think looking at the title of the show, the Tech Behind FinTech, is going to have the effect that will actually create more jobs because of the technology. It's one of those situations where we think about what the ability of the cloud, what developers have the ability to do. You can take institutions that have been around, things that we take for granted, that have been around, and you will have some technologists that will improve upon it, will make it more efficient, will maybe automate some of those things. That part of technology is exciting. So while many will look at that, and obviously 200,000, I think it was over a decade. So we're not, we're talking about a big flood of job loss. But at the same time, you think about so many new and exciting products that will be developed. And that's exciting to me. I mean, that's technology. I think that's why we are in the space that we're in. And that's what's gotten us here, because it's like, what's next? And if I can riff a little bit more, I mean, you look at our larger banks, our technology companies, they've done so much development. I mean, the Capital Ones of the world, Chase, all these banks are heavily into technology, and they've transformed the way that they do business as a result of technology. So, I mean, that's what the tech and fintech is all about. It's about innovation. It's about, new technologies, new development. It's exciting.
I think from working years in the bank, I just in big banks, and also working at or consulting with different startups and fintech people, the difference is just speed. I mean, one of the things that halt banks is the regulation aspect. So to get something to production, and the amount of change management and the change management board going through that entire process. I mean, it's definitely part of it. It's needed. It falls in line with just certain organizational frameworks and regulatory stuff that they have to adhere to and best practices. Yep. But it's slow.
Yes.
So I think that, and then when you're competing against someone who doesn't have to do that, right? Who can literally, like you said, I have this great idea. We've been working on our MVP, and we're going to just put it in production. We put it in the cloud. Now our customers can access it, and we're live.
Yep.
Right. Where you have to kind of go through all that. So you're starting at a deficit, I think. And what I'm saying, right? There's been articles about this from big banks saying that it's basically not fair. Like it's an uneven playing ground. So that's an issue, definitely. Another one, I look at it like, yes, there would be opportunities, but then you have to train, you have to evolve. Like, and looking at your backstory early, like you said, right? You literally went from a non-tech role in terms of your you have to understand it to sell it, but you're not really hands-on, to an extremely hands-on role, in which now, we're going to talk to you about your expert, get your expert advice around cloud security and things like that. We look at 200,000 people over the next 10 years, right? What's the percentage of those that will make those types of transitions? Because, it's not like there will be new opportunities, but there's going to be new opportunities, and they're not going to be necessarily easy, right? You're going to have to get training and really learn this stuff, because as the technology advances, things are getting on some notes, things are getting more complex. On other notes, the complexity is being simplified for the end user. So it's a whole topic, and we can really go on that. But that's probably another show, because it's definitely a lot of information there. But on that note, let's jump into cloud security. That is our topic of the day. how securing multi-cloud environments. So just to the audience, right? We always talk about like one cloud provider, AWS or Azure or GCP. We're not here to pick favorites on this show, but you have some environments that we talk about. In some banks too, I've had the pleasure of speaking with and presenting to. They have multiple cloud environments for myriad of reasons. Some could just be like, listen, we want to. This is our business continuity plan, right? So they're still vendors; they could still go down. We want to have something somewhere else, or we want to take advantage of certain services offered in one public cloud environment that the other one we feel that they do a better job here. So for a multitude of reasons, they could have a multi-cloud environment. But with that, now it presents multiple security concerns, right? Because now you have to be or have people and or technology capable of looking at the compliance in those environments and securing that. So Ricardo, let's dive into that. Let's talk about it. That's the topic of the day.
Yeah. So and what you're saying is exactly right. It is interesting the reasons why people will choose one cloud over the other. So it's not always just a straight business decision of what's been negotiated. It is for services reasons. Certain services, maybe big data services, run better over here. What it really comes down to, and I think you made a good point earlier, even when we talk about job reduction, is the people side of it. So there will always be a people side of it. People are the developers. So as much as machine learning as we do, you actually have to have a people side of it for oversight. You have a people side for configuration and configuration management. Where I talk to a lot of customers on a daily basis is it's really a true understanding of what that shared responsibility model is. And so every cloud provider will have a shared responsibility model saying, essentially, here are the elements of the cloud environment that we are securing. So we're not going to let anybody in our data center. We're not just going to let anybody access, host servers, storage devices, those sorts of things. But the other side of that shared responsibility model is up to the customer. So we say we will give you all of the tools to do whatever you want. You can be as innovative as you want to be, but it's your responsibility to secure your data. So that's when we start talking about the configuration. We always hear about S3 buckets being hacked. And a lot of times it's not necessarily a hack of the S3 bucket. It's the permission around the S3 bucket. It's whether you're leaving that storage bucket open, or, the other area of that is the identity and access management permissions across the cloud providers. If I can assume an identity, or if you leave some sort of resource hanging out there that I can access, and then I can assume an identity that you've already got built out in your environment, and then I can access a resource that you've left insecure, that's not the cloud provider's fault. That's a misconfiguration element. And that's what we start when we start talking about securing these multi-cloud environments. And the challenge that enterprises have is now I need to understand how AWS does this. I need to understand how Azure does it. And I need to understand how Google does it. And we have to be able to interpret the configuration elements, whether we want to codify those things. That's where the understanding comes in. So, we're in some cases securing these environments from ourselves, our own misconfigurations. So, we provide some automation around that. But, ultimately, that's what it comes down to. Knowing, sometimes it's a matter of not knowing what you need to know, not understanding how to evaluate these things. And you end up with some security vulnerabilities.
And what I think is a couple of things. Like the one thing that you mentioned, shared security responsibilities, shared security model. And one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, for people new to cloud security, or not even security, just new to the cloud, is, well, they look at it like another SaaS provider, right? If I put my data in the SaaS provider, I should be good, right? All you need to give me is a login, and I get access to this information, and I should be good. I'm not. You log on to your online. Well, I don't know if that's a good example, but I don't know. You log into your online CRM system for your business. I'm not thinking it's going to get compromised, or I'm going to do something. The only thing I'm responsible for is paying the bill and putting my contacts in there, right?
Right.
So
right.
And I think a big misconception is coming into the cloud with that type of mindset and not understanding that it's literally a shared responsibility right now. You either need to have that expertise within yourself or your team, or you need to contract that expertise because you are responsible for certain aspects. So I wanted to kind of drill in on that. And another thing that I want to talk about is how hacks actually happen, right?
Sure.
So you're on-prem, right? It's a multitude of looking at the cybersecurity kill chain and doing reconnaissance and looking to really, whether it's spear phishing, whether we're trying to compromise, remote access. It could be a multitude of various things. You may download and download something, malicious software. You can click on the wrong site. Tons of stuff. But in a cloud, right? You put something online in an endpoint. These things are scanned immediately, so it's not personal. Everything is being scanned, and it's just looking for a single misconfiguration. We have a question from the audience before I start going on a tirade. Ricardo, so your point is that multi-cloud solution can increase risk of security vulnerability due to resource shortage, expertise fragmentation, but diversify is not a proper risk remediation option. I don't understand the last part. Do you want to handle that?
Yeah, so I could touch on that. So I would say resource shortage, if we're talking about human resources, then potentially, if you have someone that doesn't necessarily have an expertise or a tool that can help understand what those vulnerabilities might be on that specific platform, and all of the platforms provide some elements of security to help you with your with securing the resource. In terms of expertise fragmentation, that's I would assume we're talking about individuals' expertise. Like if I have a really strong background in securing AWS environments, I may not be as strong in Google, and that comes down to a company making the investment in the right security architects that have that sort of expertise. I would not look at diversifying cloud platforms necessarily as a risk remediation option. I would definitely say if you have the ability to scale, say, an application across, that would be more in a business continuity sense. So if, for example, if one of the AWS regions, which doesn't, happen frequently, but if one of the regions went down, if you were to fail over into an Azure cloud and your application would run seamlessly into that would be something that you could do from a business continuity standpoint, not necessarily, remediating risk. I think what you want to try to get to a point is when you're interpreting, especially when it comes to compliance frameworks. So if you're looking for like SOC 2 compliance or something like that, or even best practices across the cloud environments, you want to be able to make sure that you're interpreting everything the same across those cloud environments. So, interpreting, not having a SSH port open to the world, you need to understand how to look for that vulnerability across every cloud platform, because they're going to interpret it differently. They're going to call whether it's a network security group or a firewall or a security group in another cloud platform. You need to be able to interpret that across all of the cloud platforms.
Mirko, thank you very much for the question. We really appreciate it. Excellent response. So, you touched on another point, right? So there's things in general that are practices that all clouds you should just go by. I know AWS did a really good job with their well-architected framework, and those same principles can be applied to Azure, GCP, even IBM's cloud. Maybe we should touch on that a bit, and just so we could give people some ideas around some principles around that.
Yeah, so all of the providers have, or I should say CIS, so Center for Internet Security, has a benchmarks for each one of the cloud providers. So that's kind of a starting point of best practices. And there may be some that you don't want to adhere to for whatever reason, but that's typically what your starting point is. You know, we consider, we look at it, and we being Fugue, so we look at IAM as being a different network. So that's specifically identity and access management. You really want to get an understanding of identity and access management, of how it works across each one of the cloud provider platforms. You had mentioned, you started to ask a question about how hacks happen. So, you know, what we find a lot is that there's usually some sort of resource that's been left orphaned. And by an orphaned resource means, you know, you could spin something up in a dev environment where you're running some testing. And just because we're all human and we get calls and we get distracted and we're doing different things, we don't shut it down. So we've got that thing open to the world. And like you just mentioned, somebody's scanning ports, somebody finds it and is somehow able to get into it. I mean, we've seen credentials being left on in buckets and even on servers. So it's really crazy how that happens. But it's what they do from there is traverse the identities within the cloud platform provider. So being able to secure those things, being able to just know what you have out there so that you know what to secure is always a starting point. But I think, you know, best practices and like you mentioned, the well-architected framework, you know, starting there and just having a practice of reviewing these things on a regular basis, so that you have an understanding of what's out there, what's potentially vulnerable. And obviously you need to start on that process of working towards fixing those things.
IT asset management, you know, that's just a great principle, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, right? Like they say in boxing, it's the punch that you don't see. That's the one that knocks you out, right? So same concept. I mean, having that, you have situations obviously with shadow IT. So you have, you know, people that have really good internal ideas. They want to experiment, and they have the admin permissions or the permissions to spin up their own environment, and they leave these things, like you said, orphaned. So that's an excellent point. Also, you know, traceability, you know, detection. Like how can you protect everything? You know, that's, I don't know, they always say 100% security, who knows? But detection is key in terms of how fast can you detect when something goes wrong? How fast can you detect a misconfiguration in your cloud? And I think we have some interesting stats. Let me add these stats to the screen so we can kind of talk through some stats. So I'm part of the CSA and Fugues, also that Cloud Security Alliance, and they have some really interesting stats I just pulled from them. Lack of awareness of cloud security policies, 52% of respondents said that. Lack of adequate controls and oversight, 49%. Too many APIs and interfaces to adequately govern, 43%. Negligent insider behavior, 32%. So the highest thing is just not understanding your cloud security policies. Some others. You want to talk?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, you know, like traditionally, you know, people, I think that there's a misconception that developers don't care about security, like they just want to innovate and do things faster. So, you know, one of the things we often talk about is being able to integrate whatever your security and policy checks are at the level that developers will access. So whether it's your infrastructure as code, or even, you know, being able to trigger checks for all of that stuff once you deploy. So you really want to make sure that the people that are interacting with the cloud environments have the ability to inspect whatever they're doing, but really to know what those policies are.
No, that's an excellent point. We move down to hold on, see if I can pull up. Have multiple things going on here. Give me a second. Multiple computers going on. Let's see. All right, there. Okay, we have another stat. So in terms of different types of misconfigurations, that the highest one, security groups rules around your firewalls. The second highest, like you mentioned, identity and access management, 40%. This is 36%. Encryption at rest disabled. All right, so yeah, you're not. And these are principles. These are principles like, you know, encryption at rest, encryption at transit in terms of your data, encryption at transit's the next one. let's see. I always love stats, man. The numbers always.
They're always validating, because
Yes,
we're technologists, so we live in a data world. But like these are conversations that I have every day. So, we always talk about security groups being open to the world. And sometimes it's just easy to do that, but you don't think about, you don't think about it at the end of the day. Like, I just want to test it. I just want to get to it. So just let me in and I'll set it up so it's only on my home network or something like that. Identity and access management, we talk about that all the time. We want to spend time figuring out what the exact policy is with the exact permissions, but because we're human, I'm just going to use this broad permission and not knowing, the danger of using that broad permission, what I'm exposing myself to. So, and then that last one, orphaned infrastructure. I mean, I've got orphaned infrastructure out there. Yeah. I mean, we all do it just from our testing and doing some things. So it's a really good graphic.
But not only security, right? That gets expensive, right? These things cost money.
Absolutely.
Like, this is not. I mean, obviously, security is huge, but if it's just from the CFO looking at it and looking at, look, you guys are blowing the budget because, so just it's like security can actually be a cost saver in this instance with understanding your environment, understanding misconfigurations, understanding your full control of your assets. I mean, when we talk about I talk about security, I would always harp on what is, and this is just more so a general conversation, even off the cloud. What's your IT assets? Like, what's your hardware? What's your software? What are your licensing? Like, give me the information on all that. Yeah. Because a lot of times you'll get incidents just from not updating your software. So who knows if you have something off, who knows what's running on that thing? So that's an interesting point. Let's go to another graphic here. So we have mean time to remediation, cloud misconfiguration. So obviously automation is key. If this stuff is not automated, where you can't even detect the drift, and drift meaning the current state, and if something changed and you got back, like what's the delta? If you can't detect that, and like, what do you see now when you're talking to a lot of your customers?
Yeah, what's funny, so I'm looking at this and I see that 1% don't know. I think that's probably increased.
Okay.
Yeah, and obviously I'm not going to tell everybody how long it takes us to fix stuff. But a lot of times it's just a matter of detection. So, part of this is when we detect it, how long does it take us to remediate it? And sometimes these things go undetected for longer than a week. Longer than a month. We've had, we talk about horror stories. We had a customer that discovered they had a VPC peer that was, or a VPC that was peered to their production VPC. The peered VPC was open to the world, and they had no idea it was there. But it was an intern that was doing some testing for them and writing some stuff that left it wide open. So, when you talk about mean time to remediation, they didn't discover it until they were doing some testing with us, and then they went to go and fix it. So that I don't know category is probably a lot bigger, but I mean, you definitely want systems that are going to detect it, alert, open tickets, those sorts of things, so that they can be addressed.
No, good, all good points. We have some comments from the audience. Let's start with my man Jeff. Okay. From a business standpoint, has securing the cloud environment caused issues for customers' identity access? For the policies discussed, what methods / process have you come across to communicate and increase customer awareness? Good question.
Somewhat. I mean, honestly, it can create friction within the organization, because I think you have folks, specifically developers and others that are innovating, that they want to be able to move fast. So that's really what it comes down to, being able to move fast at the speed of cloud, but operate in a secure manner. So, we run into that customers, you really want to try to bring the developers and the security teams and the compliance teams together, getting them on the same page so that, singing from the same sheet of music. We understand what our policies are. We want to try to implement those policies early in our process, and then on an ongoing basis have some oversight. So yeah, absolutely. The second part of that. Yeah, in terms of, I mean, I'm assuming customers, like just internal customers. So that's really what it comes down to. Just setting up initiatives within the organization's programs, and you absolutely have to have buy-in across the organization. So the devs have to be working with security. I was at a conference where recently, where not recently, I'd say pre-COVID, when it was DevSecOps. So it was like the developers cheer and the operations dudes cheer, but when they talk about security, they're like, we don't like those guys. Because the idea is that, security is always going to slow things down, but we want to try to speed that up.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm a fan of DevSecOps. It's a huge proponent of the whole shift left movement and embedding security earlier on in the process. And really, the goal in general, this is my opinion, right? Security inherently, when you secure something, you're going to slow it down, right? If I left my door open, it's a lot easier for me to come in and out of my house, right? By locking my door, it takes me an extra time to come into my home, right? Yeah. Now, I'm willing to sacrifice that extra time for the risk of someone else not coming into my home, right, who may cause my family danger. So, I mean, same concept. And I just think it's really the key is empowering the developers or empowering other people outside security and giving them the necessary tools to enable them to do their job effectively and so they basically empower you. Like, so security internally is acting more like an evangelist, acting more like a consultant, acting more internally, right? And not like, okay, we're stopping you. It's how do I help you achieve your goals, enable you to do it? So now you're learning as you're going on because, maybe with certain tools, you're seeing compliance issues that you haven't seen before. So now it's an educational process, or even in your IDE, right? We're seeing as you code, you're seeing certain coding practices, that are not secure, but now you're learning as you go on. So that's one of the that's my little soliloquy.
Yeah, I think to put a bow on your analogy, and that, like, the next element of that is you closing the door and having a smart speaker or some sort of smart device automatically lock it behind you. So that's kind of where we're going.
I love that. I love that. I mean, and even as we move forward in the future, right? Maybe my Ring device can scan me and automatically just open a door, and when I pass through it, it automatically locks. And then when another person comes, it has a loudspeaker and say, "This is a strange person in front of your house, stranger danger," right? I mean, we can keep going on with the whole thing. I love it. But that's pretty much where we're at, right? And that's part of the innovation aspect of it. All right, we have a comment from YouTube. Info Bro, he came to the show a couple of times before. Thanks for joining in today. Really appreciate you tuning in. Detection is key. Listen, I love that. That's a fact. We have I just finished my all my classes requirements towards this PhD in cyber and AI. And one of the professors, this is one thing he harped on: protection over detection. Works with the government, all sorts of stuff. And I mean, detection over protection. So constantly, because 100% security, I don't know if that's a realistic ask, right? Because that's going to get very expensive. So you have to prioritize based on your business, prioritize based on the assets that you have and so forth, and say, okay, these are our top priorities, and also some threat intelligence for like what are some of the major threats in our vertical. So let's knock out that list first, and then we can continue with the rest. But the main thing is, how quick can you detect this? We talk about advanced persistent threats with someone just on the network indefinitely, and it could result in what's happening right now with all these different breaches and ransomware attacks. These guys are not just they've been there; they're living there. All right, another topic, another question from the audience. DevSecOps, awesome. Thanks to Nnamdi, Ricardo. Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for tuning in. Really appreciate you. Listen, we're getting towards the 12:40 mark. I know I know Ricardo's extremely busy. He has a lot of things to do. But let's start just giving some overall takeaway advice. I would love right now from you, just everything that you've seen. I mean, especially with the customers in these multi-cloud environments that we can leave the audience with. What are some of your thoughts right now?
Yeah, I think adoption as enterprises are moving into the cloud, first is just obviously educating and understanding what what some of those vulnerabilities are within those environments. I think what we've seen a lot is customers taking a subset of what that best practices framework is. So whether it's CIS benchmarks or something like that, and starting to implement those across the organization. And it's really an education of anybody that's interacting with those environments. If they're educated on what they're looking for, what's going to render a specific setting vulnerable, non-compliant, what have you. And once we start educating, then it becomes part of that daily practice. So it's like, if you're told on a daily basis, like you said, close the door behind you, close the door behind you, close that security group, close that security group. If we're educating and informing folks on our teams on a regular basis, it becomes a regular practice so that when you're doing your infrastructure as code, that 4 zeros that you want to put there just because I want to, move onto something else, not to do that. So it's just a matter of educating, I think, communicating across organizations. And then, we become smarter and smarter and more sophisticated in how we address that. And we move security, to the forefront, and it becomes a thought as we start developing and innovating.
I love it. And I love what you said about using an existing framework to help drive your security adoption. And especially if you're in a multi-cloud solution, I mean, you have to now find the nuances within each of the technologies that you're using, but at least you have a pathway to get there. That's excellent. Ricardo, I'm so appreciative of your time today. I know we've been trying to get together for a while on this show, so I'm really happy you joined us. I consider you a friend of the show, so the door's open for you to swing back with some other interesting topics, and we could dive into different things, cloud related or whatever. We'll love to have that conversation and extend it. Before we close out, how can the audience get in contact with you?
So really easy. Direct emails, just ricardo@fugue.co. So it's FUGUE.co. And as a not a good social media citizen, I don't know my Twitter handle offhand, but I'm on LinkedIn as well. So feel free to connect with me there. Our main site for the company is just fugue.co. So FUGUE.co. And Nnamdi, I appreciate the invite. I will absolutely be back, and definitely thank you for the time, the platform, and this community. It's awesome. That's
great, man. Listen, you have a nice weekend. Stay off. I'll touch base with you offline. And to everyone else, thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks for the comments. We really, really appreciate you. And as always, every Friday at 12 p.m. EST, we talk about various topics around technology, the technology behind FinTech. So, we'll be back next week at 12 p.m. and look forward to, interesting conversations. Have an excellent weekend, everyone. Cheers.
Take care.